humans should not exist. Not as a philosophical statement, as a conclusion, the one you reach when you look honestly at the conditions that shaped our species and ask a simple question: how did anything survive that? The earth that built us was violent, cold, and repeatedly hostile to almost everything that tried to live on it. Ecosystems collapsed within generations. Temperatures shifted faster than migration routes could adapt. And across that unstable world, human species were vanishing one by one. Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo erectus. Entire branches of humanity that had survived hundreds of thousands of years dissolved into silence. By every biological rule governing species survival, we should have joined them. And yet, one small population held on. Not the strongest, not the fastest, not the most physically prepared for what the Ice Age was about to become. Us. A fragile, slow-reproducing primate clinging to existence at the edge of a frozen world. At -40 degrees, exposed tissue freezes within minutes. A failed hunt triggers metabolic collapse. Wet clothing becomes lethal hours after sunset. The human body, by itself, was not enough. Which means something else was happening. Humans did not survive because the body became powerful enough. Humans survived because survival itself moved outside the body. A system emerged. And once that system appeared, nothing on Earth would ever be the same. For most species, adaptation is biological. The environment changes, natural selection rewards useful traits, and over thousands of years, anatomy slowly adjusts. Thicker fur, more efficient lungs, cold-resistant circulation, slow, expensive, and relentlessly physical. But humans faced a problem biology could not solve fast enough. The Ice Age was not changing on evolutionary timescales. A climate shift could destabilize entire ecosystems within decades. A genetic adaptation might require thousands of years to spread. That gap became lethal for any species that relied on anatomy alone. So humans began evolving in a direction almost no other species had ever taken. Instead of waiting for biology to catch up, they externalized adaptation. Clothing became artificial fur. Shelters became portable environments. Fire became external metabolism. Language became distributed memory, allowing one mind's knowledge to live inside many others simultaneously. Human survival stopped depending entirely on the individual body. It began depending on networks. A lone human in Ice Age Eurasia was genuinely fragile, but connected humans changed the equation entirely. One person remembered the migration routes. Another knew where rivers stayed unfrozen through the deepest winters. Another had survived a valley and knew it funneled deadly wind during storms. No single individual carried the complete survival system. The group did. And that distinction may be the precise reason our species is still here, while every other human species is not. If this is making you think differently about human history, subscribe to Prehistoric Shadows, where we follow these questions wherever they lead. The human brain is catastrophically expensive. Even today, it consumes a disproportionate share of total body energy. Under Ice Age conditions, that burden became existentially dangerous because cold environments create a permanent energy emergency that never pauses and never forgives. Every calorie becomes structural. Every failed hunt has consequences that compound across days. And this changes how scientists interpret what prehistoric hunters were actually doing. They were not simply feeding themselves. They were converting ecosystems into thermal survival. Large Ice Age mammals carried enormous fat reserves, and fat mattered in ways that went far beyond caloric density. Protein alone cannot sustain a human body under prolonged extreme cold. Without sufficient fat, metabolism collapses in a condition called rabbit starvation. A person can eat continuously and still die, because the macronutrient balance is catastrophically wrong, which means prehistoric humans were managing energy systems with a precision that looks increasingly sophisticated the more carefully we study it. A successful hunt stabilized survival for days. A failed migration season threatened systemic collapse, and that pressure drove humans toward something that feels remarkably modern: redundancy. Extra clothing stored against unexpected weather. Knowledge distributed across multiple individuals so no single death erased what the group depended on. The same principles that stabilize modern supply chains may have first appeared around Ice Age fire pits, where one unexpected storm could kill everyone before morning. Humans survived because they learned to reduce fragility before fragility could kill them. The systems that failed to do that disappeared, leaving no descendants and no memory. Fire mattered enormously, but in extreme cold, fire alone was genuinely insufficient. At low enough temperatures, thermal loss can exceed the heat a nearby flame generates. Ice Age survival depended on integrated thermal systems working together, not on any single technology in isolation. Archaeological evidence is forcing researchers to reconsider how sophisticated prehistoric clothing actually was. Not rough animal skins, layered insulation structures tailored to the human form, with sinew stitching, moisture regulation, wind-resistant exterior layers, and air-trapping interior designs functioning on the same physical principles as modern technical outerwear. Humans were engineering mobile microclimates around their own bodies. Picture a mother waking in darkness to check whether the fur lining near her child's face had frozen overnight. A hunting group cutting frozen fat from a carcass while wind erased their tracks behind them. A child learning to recognize dangerous snow by sound before learning language fluently. These were not instincts. They were instructions passed deliberately from person to person across generations. A mistake made while walking could kill a person while sleeping. A child born into an Ice Age community inherited a system immediately. How to orient hides against prevailing wind. How to recognize dangerous cold before frost damage appeared on skin. Mistakes their ancestors had already died making, so they would never have to make them personally. End quote. The system remembered on behalf of everyone. And once a system could remember better than any individual within it, human adaptation began exceeding anything purely biological evolution had ever produced. The story told about Neanderthals for decades was comfortable and clean, primitive humans, evolutionary dead ends, replaced by superior modern humans who were simply smarter and more deserving of survival. That story is collapsing under evidence that refuses to support it. Neanderthals controlled fire, built sophisticated tools, hunted large animals in coordinated groups, adapted to Ice Age Europe across hundreds of thousands of years, a tenure of survival that modern Homo sapiens have not yet matched. Physically, they may have been stronger than us in many conditions, and yet they are gone, every one of them. Their extinction did not happen to weak humans who deserve to fail. It happened to highly capable humans whose systems could not stabilize under increasing environmental pressure. Climate instability intensified, habitats fragmented, and systemic collapse rarely arrives all at once. One failed hunting season weakens nutrition. Weakened nutrition lowers reproductive success. Smaller populations transmit knowledge less reliably. Reduced knowledge transmission lowers future adaptability. Then the system crosses a threshold it cannot recover from, not dramatically, but quietly and irreversibly. Most extinctions are not explosions. They are cascading failures that look like slow disappearances from the outside. This may explain why Homo sapiens expanded while other human species contracted. Not because individual sapiens were superior, but because sapiens built broader exchange networks capable of distributing survival pressure across larger territories. Larger networks stabilize risk. Local collapse no longer guarantees extinction when the network extends beyond any single region. Humanity may not have survived through dominance. Humanity may have survived through synchronization. Human reproduction is, by almost any biological standard, catastrophically inefficient. Human infants remain physically vulnerable for years. Mothers require enormous energetic and social support. Children are highly sensitive to cold, injury, and starvation during a developmental window that lasts years rather than weeks. From a purely individual standpoint, this is an absurd biological design. It makes sense only when you recognize that the group itself had become part of reproduction. Grandparents contributed environmental memory that younger adults had not yet accumulated memories of droughts, of difficult winters, of migration paths that only appeared once a generation. Older individuals remained valuable long after their physical peak. Because they carried survival information the group could not afford to lose. A remembered river crossing from 30 years ago. A drought cycle that returned on a pattern no young adult had personally experienced. A winter shelter location that only mattered once every several decades. The past became survival infrastructure. Once information could survive longer than the individual who first discovered it, human adaptation began accelerating beyond anything biological evolution had achieved. Civilization did not begin with cities or writing or agriculture. It began when memory became transferable across generations, with enough reliability to actually change survival outcomes. Animals survive primarily in the present tense. Humans began surviving the future before it arrived, preparing for winters not yet visible, teaching children to recognize dangers they had never personally encountered. That transition, quiet and almost invisible in the archaeological record, may have altered the trajectory of life on Earth more profoundly than any extinction event that came before it. The Ice Age punished rigidity and rewarded flexibility with a consistency that becomes impossible to ignore once you see it. Groups dependent on single environments disappeared when those environments changed. Rigid systems vanished. Adaptive systems survived. And that pressure may explain something about human language rarely discussed outside academic contexts. Language did not emerge because abstract thought needed a vehicle for expression. Language accelerated because environmental pressure demanded increasingly precise coordination between individuals functioning as a unified system. Danger warnings had to be specific enough to be actionable. Thermal management knowledge had to reach people before they made mistakes that would have taught them personally at lethal cost. Language allowed humans to transfer survival experience without requiring direct exposure to the survival threat itself. A person could navigate a danger they had never personally faced because another human had faced it first, survived it, and found the words. That ability is genuinely extraordinary when held against the rest of the natural world. Most species learn through direct individual experience. Humans began learning collectively through distributed memory that accumulated faster than any individual could generate it and lasted longer than any individual who contributed to it. Once survival knowledge began accumulating across generations, the species started adapting at a pace that genetics alone cannot explain. Evolution had been circumvented, not broken, but supplemented by something faster, more flexible, and capable of responding to change within a single lifetime. The species had discovered externalized survival. Remove the systems built on shared knowledge, and the species collapses. Keep building them, and the species accelerates. Which is precisely what happened next. Then came the bottlenecks. At several points in prehistory, human populations may have fallen to numbers so low that extinction was not a distant possibility. It was a near statistical certainty. Genetic evidence embedded in modern human DNA carries the echo of these collapses, the strange uniformity that emerges when a species has been squeezed through a bottleneck narrow enough that diversity itself was nearly lost. Every human alive today may descend from populations so fragile that a single prolonged failure, the right volcanic winter, the right prey collapse, the right drought arriving in the wrong season, could have ended the lineage permanently. What makes this difficult to absorb is not the magnitude of those near extinctions. It is the randomness. Our survival at its most precarious moments did not depend on grand decisions made by heroic individuals. It depended on systems holding together through conditions designed to destroy them, on communities that stayed functional when fragmentation would have been the rational individual response. The systems simply held together long enough to continue. That was all it needed to do. Mobility proved to be one of survival's most powerful tools. When one ecosystem failed, humans moved. When prey disappeared locally, networks redistributed pressure geographically. Migration was not wandering. Migration was resilience expressed as geography. And that ancient logic did not disappear when the Ice Age ended. It scaled. Modern supply chains distribute resource risk globally. Information networks preserve collective memory across distances incomprehensible to our ancestors. The infrastructure of modern civilization is, at its functional core, Ice Age survival architecture expanded to planetary scale. The problems being solved are the same problems. The systems are the same systems. Only the size has changed. Modern culture celebrates the individual, but the prehistoric evidence points in a direction that complicates that narrative considerably. Isolated humans were fragile. Connected humans were resilient. And the gap between those two conditions may have shaped human psychology at a level far deeper than culture or philosophy. Human emotions, the ones that feel most fundamental and universal, increasingly look like survival infrastructure. Loneliness discourages isolation at a visceral, pre-rational level. Guilt stabilizes cooperative behavior, even when defection would offer short-term individual advantage. Grief preserves the social significance of individuals whose knowledge made them load-bearing members of the survival network. Anxiety anticipates threat before it arrives. Hope sustains persistence through prolonged hardship when rational calculation might suggest continuation is not worth the cost. Love protects the extended, energetically expensive investment that human child-rearing requires. Emotion may not primarily be psychological experience in any abstract sense. Emotion may be survival infrastructure, the internal architecture that kept human social systems from fragmenting under exactly the pressures that destroyed every other human lineage. Groups that lost cooperative cohesion typically disappeared soon after. Groups that abandoned long-term planning became vulnerable to failures that planning would have prevented. Human consciousness evolved under permanent negotiation, with uncertainty always scanning for instability, always preparing for a winter that might arrive before the system was ready. And perhaps that is why modern humans, surrounded by unprecedented abundance and technological protection, still carry the persistent background anxiety of a species that spent most of its existence one bad winter from extinction. The Ice Age system may still be running inside us, beneath everything we have built on top of it, still searching for the threat, still preparing for the cold. So why do humans exist? The honest answer is that we almost did not. Evolution did not guarantee our survival. Nature did not protect us. What prevented our extinction was not individual strength. It was the emergence of a survival architecture built from cooperation, memory, thermal management, mobility, storytelling, redundancy, and knowledge transferred deliberately across generations. A hunter who memorized migration routes his children would never need to rediscover through personal failure. An elder carrying in her memory the location of a shelter no one alive had used but everyone would need before the next winter ended. A mother teaching thermal management to children who would live or die by how well they learned it. Most of the people who preserved our species never knew that was what they were doing. They repaired clothing before storms arrived because cold was coming and unprepared people died. They shared food during shortages because the group was the thing they lived inside. They stayed together through conditions designed to fragment them, and the system survived one more winter because they did. Then another, until eventually the species crossed through the narrowest of its bottlenecks and began building everything we now call civilization cities, functioning like heat clusters, concentrating resources against the cold. Trade routes functioning like migration networks, redistributing pressure when local conditions fail. The internet functioning like distributed memory at a scale no Ice Age community could have imagined. Civilization itself functioning like a planetary nervous system, attempting to stabilize a species that has never fully shed the survival instincts of its origins. The strangest part of human evolution may not be that we survived. It may be that survival stopped belonging to individuals so long ago that we have nearly forgotten it ever did. It began belonging to the system. And beneath the concrete and satellites and electric light, that ancient architecture may still be running, still scanning, still preparing, still doing quietly what it has always done. Because for most of human history, survival meant keeping the system alive through one more winter. And perhaps, beneath everything we call civilization, that is still what humanity is trying to do. Maybe civilization itself is just the longest winter shelter humans have ever built.